If you are building software, you can often launch fast, see what breaks, fix the bug, and push an update. But what if your product is a satellite? You cannot launch it, discover the data is unusable, and fix it next week. That is why deep tech founders need a different way to prototype. This case is for founders building ventures where failure is expensive: space tech, advanced hardware, and other engineering heavy businesses. In these ventures, prototyping is about answering one question: what proof do we need before we spend the next large amount of money? To follow GalaxEye's journey, we will use three simple lenses: TRL, risk assessment, and CTQ. Technology readiness level helps us see what kind of prototype belonged at each stage, while risk assessment helps us see which uncertainty had to be reduced before the next commitment. Critical to quality helps us see what proof target was strong enough to move forward. Now let's see how GalaxEye tested one risk at a time before the cost of failure became too high. Suyash Singh, founder and CEO of GalaxEye, articulates the limitations that later became GalaxEye's starting point.
So we had to do the quantitative damage assessment in 2020 of California forest fire. When I thought I will bring in satellite imagery and do a bunch of AI and do the quantitative damage assessment, the imagery was either cloudy or smoky. So it was almost impossible for me to do something about it. The second kind of imagery that I found was radars or synthetic aperture radar. It almost looked like an X-ray. Looks like an X-ray. So, although I'm from IIT Madras, it took me a month to understand that imagery. So this problem caught me into thinking, why has satellite imagery world not gone so far? And probably this is the precise reason.
That was the problem GalaxEye chose to solve. Can we combine optical imagery and radar so satellite imagery becomes reliable enough and understandable enough for real decisions? Even before starting, the founders had to prove one core idea. Could a camera and a radar sit on the same satellite and observe the same ground reality? This was a challenge because cameras usually look straight down, while radar systems often observe the Earth at an angle. Instead of accepting that limitation, the founders built a purely mathematical prototype to explore a solution. They explored whether the camera could also image at an angle, around 20 degrees off nadir, so that both sensing systems could align perfectly. That was the pre-venture proof at the TRL 1 and 2 stage. For GalaxEye, the proof was entirely mathematical. They were proving that the core idea was technically plausible enough to justify the first physical proof of concept and launch their journey. The mathematical workaround made the idea plausible, but not yet a proof of concept. To close TRL3, GalaxEye had to show the core idea could work in an experimental physical setup. The POC had to prove that the combined sensing setup could capture usable signals to reconstruct an SAR image. Before spending huge money on airborne testing, the team chose a cheaper, faster way to see if they could eliminate the risk in spite of interference and noise. Their experiment? A ground rail proxy at IIT Madras. GalaxEye captured the signal and produced its first reconstructed SAR image. That completed the POC. And it unlocked the decision to move into airborne testing, to answer a tougher question. Could the system still work when motion, vibration, and real-world instability entered the picture? Aircraft were too expensive, so they chose heavy-lift drones. The goal was to test whether data produced in motion could still be useful. As Suyash Singh explains,
Product in our case is more about how does my data looks like, right? Is my data AI compatible? Is my data analytics ready, right? How do I see my data being utilized by a customer or a consumer? So for that, before even going to space, what do? Is we fly on drones or aircrafts or airplanes, and you do a several amount of testing. So I think you need to be very innovative in terms of looking at how do you build those custom markers for yourself to realize the technology and then build that demand and customers, whatever it is.
their first experiments were brutal, nothing but salt and pepper static. With limited capital, they shifted to software. Over repeated flights, they wrote code to decode signals and correct for the drone's shaking. Signal by signal, they turned static into usable imagery. This answered the CTQ. Convert unstable airborne signals into usable imagery. The lesson: when the ideal solution is too expensive, find the cheapest workaround, code, process, or a scrappy proxy that produces credible evidence. The goal is to reduce the next risk without burning unnecessary capital. Validated signals led GalaxEye to TRL5, technology validation in a relevant environment. Now they needed to prove that the output worked in a real environment over time. This stage is critical for deep tech scaling. This test came through the Thayer project. They monitored live Hyperloop construction for 30 days, day and night, rain or shine, testing their system in real world conditions. Could their system detect relevant features accurately over time? A system may work in test flights but fail when the environment keeps changing. By achieving over 90% accuracy in feature detection, they proved the system could support real world monitoring use cases reliably. That unlocked the next decision. Move from relevant environment validation to a harder question. Could the riskiest subsystem work closer to actual space conditions? GalaxEye had not yet reached scalable satellite data revenue. But it was no longer just an idea, it had built staged evidence. And because each stage reduced risk, different kinds of support started becoming possible. Early investors backed the prototype journey. This proof attracted strategic backers like Infosys, who saw the immense value in their high resolution geospatial data. Their imagery became a powerful input for AI, analytics, and enterprise decision making, moving beyond just simple image products. This is the deep tech J curve. As Suyar Singh explains, deep tech needs a different investment lens.
What you need to think through is there's a hockey stick curve that is going to come at the end of the technology development, right?
Right.
So the more you actually have to invest more and more till your technology is commercially accepted, and that point, you're the only one, right? So let's say you're building for a SaaS company. There'll be probably 5 more SaaS companies that will come and build the same thing. But when you are in deep tech, you probably are the only one doing that particular thing because that needs investment, that needs talent attraction, and it needs a lot of effort to be built, right? So you have
Building
the
in
moat.
itself is the moat.
Yes. So building itself is the moat. Sustaining that itself is the moat.
For GalaxEye, the moat was the technology itself, building it, sustaining it, and proving that it could hold under harder and harder conditions. Before GalaxEye could answer the commercial question, it still had to answer a harder technical one. Could the critical subsystem work in conditions close to space? This could not be answered in one jump. Mission Drishti was GalaxEye's planned full Optosar satellite. But before building the full satellite, they had to answer a TRL 56 question. Can SAR output remain useful from a more demanding airborne platform? Higher altitude and HAP-style testing helped prove that the sensing stack could work beyond small drone conditions. But sensing was only one part of the risk. GalaxEye also recognized that high-resolution SAR data can be extremely heavy. For defense and operational users, raw data is not useful if it slows down or overloads the systems that need to act on it. So the next mission-critical question was, can the processing system turn heavy space-generated SAR data into something usable fast enough? The prototype had to answer this key question, for which they needed a smaller space proxy ACID before risking Mission Drishti. GalaxEye entered the space testing ecosystem through InSpace, which enables private space startups to access ISRO facilities and orbital opportunities. ISRO's POEM platform, an orbital testbed built from the spent fourth stage of a PSLV rocket, gave GalaxEye that opportunity. On POEM, GalaxEye flew GLXSQ. GLXSQ was a focused TRL-6 payload, a smaller test asset designed to prove the critical processing capability in space. The CDQ was extremely specific. Process and compress 400 megabytes of raw SAR data to less than 1.5 megabytes in under 10 minutes. That metric connected technology performance to customer use. It showed whether the payload could survive the space environment and turn space-based SAR data into something light enough and fast enough for real systems on the ground. That is TRL-6. GalaxEye was not proving the whole product yet. Through GLXSQ, they reduced a catastrophic processing risk before committing fully to Mission Drishti. Now, the TRL-7 question for GalaxEye was, can the full satellite survive launch-like stress? The sensing stack, processing system, structure, communications, power, and payload integration now had to behave as one satellite. Failure could come from vibration, shock, vacuum, thermal stress, structural weakness, or one subsystem disturbing another. Here is how Suyar Singh articulates the process of prototyping.
Building a satellite takes a longer time. Let's say it's 4 to 5 year cycle. There are different stages to build a satellite and understand, test it at several stages of your life cycle. Then you start ordering few components, you start to do testing, and then you put it on the table called flat sat. And if the satellite is all flat open and you test it out, then you close it down, test it in a thermo vacuum chamber, and then you send to space.
That is the hidden work before launch. Before a satellite reaches the rocket, it has to survive the discipline of integration and qualification. Their CTQ. After qualification stress, the satellite had to remain structurally sound and ready to operate as one system. Flight readiness testing now became the gate. GalaxEye's structural model was tested at ISRO's URAO Satellite Center, proving that the system was moving from separate technical proofs toward launch readiness. And then came TRL-8. This is the point where the product leaves the test world. Until now, GalaxEye had been reducing risk through models, rails, drones, field sites, higher altitude platforms, and a space proxy payload. Mission Drishti was not a prototype. It was the full Optosar satellite product. It weighed about 190 kilograms, built to combine multispectral imaging and synthetic aperture radar on one platform. Built to deliver all-weather, day-night, analysis-ready imagery from orbit. On the 3rd of May 2026, Mission Drishti launched aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from SLC-4E in California. The launch was a success. Mission Drishti successfully reached orbit. The full satellite product could now begin operating as one system in space. GalaxEye had crossed the TRL-8 milestone. GalaxEye was not just trying to develop a satellite. The satellite was the infrastructure. The business still had to prove the data service. Reliable, all-weather, analysis-ready Earth observation data that customers and partners could use in real decisions. The final TRL question was not, did the satellite reach orbit? That was TRL-8. The TRL-9 question was much sharper. Can the product become a repeatable commercial data platform? GalaxEye was not starting this stage cold. Before Mission Drishti even launched, Infosys had joined as a strategic investor. New Space India Limited, NSIL, the commercial arm of ISRO, had signed the landmark agreement to act as a reseller for GalaxEye's Optosar data. While those were promising early signals, TRL-9 requires operational proof. Once Mission Drishti entered its commissioning phase and the technical hurdles were behind them, the nature of the challenge transformed. The new primary risk was now commercial repeatability. Could the data be produced reliably enough that customers in agriculture, defense, and maritime operations would continually pay for it? As CEO Suyash Singh emphasizes, GalaxEye is not just a hardware manufacturer, they are a data company. Their goal is to build the app store of Earth observation data, a foundational layer where downstream companies can build AI and analytics applications without ever worrying about cloud cover. And this is where TRL-9 unlocks massive scale. Proving the data as a service model with Mission Drishti opened the path to scale and unlocked the decision to scale from a single mission to an entire infrastructure grid. GalaxEye has already described a 10-satellite constellation roadmap by 2030 to improve revisit frequency, coverage, and reliability. Reports indicate that they have begun designing their second-generation 300-kilogram satellites capable of 0.5-meter resolution. This is the ultimate founder lesson from GalaxEye. When building in deep tech, you do not just ask, what is the biggest prototype we can build? You use the validation framework. At every single stage, from a crude lab bench to a vibrating drone, to a space proxy, to a 190-kilogram satellite, you ask 3 questions. 1. What is the primary risk currently blocking our survival? 2. What is the exact critical to quality, CTQ, metric needed to eliminate that risk? 3. What is the scrappiest prototype we can build to hit that CTQ and unlock our next major business decision? Do not build a prototype just because it looks like progress. Build the exact prototype required to sequence your survival. That is how you hack the cost of failure. And that is how you move from an idea to orbit to repeatable commercial value.